So Preston, you came to me and you had this you hit me up privately and you're like, "Hey, I got the great idea for a topic we could discuss." And it's about Tyrion and I'm like, "Huh, interesting. Tell me more." And then you told me it involves Littlefinger. Say no more.
Yeah,
I'm in. Let's
right.
what is
Well, the
this?
topic is perhaps like the biggest plot hole in the entire series. I'm going to go that big. Like it's
Hmm.
arguable about what the biggest plot hole in the whole series is. And there's like little mistakes here, or how we've discussed how it's kind of ridiculous that like Ned came to the conclusion that Cersei was committing incest. Realizing that she was having an affair is one thing, but the incest is a big jump.
And
Like
you're
those
and
those
there
are
was a theory behind it that maybe it involved Lyanna and Benjen incest and that's why incest was on his mind.
one could still make the argument that yeah, okay, it's a little bit of a stretch, but Ned still just made that jump, and
By the way, for those
and
of you wondering about that video, it's on my channel. It's called "The One Plot Hole You Didn't Notice in Game of Thrones." That's the
yeah.
video we discuss it in.
So this is what many fans consider to be the greatest plot hole of the entire series. So I'm building it up. It has to do with the dagger. In A Game of Thrones, Catelyn, arrests Tyrion because she believes that Tyrion's dagger was used to attack Bran. And then Tyrion says, "No, that wasn't my dagger. That's ridiculous. Who told you that?" And she says, "Peter Baelish, like Peter told me that." And in A Game of Thrones, Tyrion's like, "Dude, you believe Littlefinger? Like Littlefinger's the biggest liar in the world. Like what? Like come on." Logically speaking, like this is the start of the war. Like Catelyn arresting Tyrion triggers almost everything. Littlefinger it's his fault. Everything is going forward and becoming a big mess. And Tyrion knows this. And so he arrives in King's Landing at the beginning of A Clash of Kings. He arrives with, his mountain clans, the letter declaring that he is the hand. He has all of this power. He arrives and he does nothing with Littlefinger. He does nothing to address like what Littlefinger did. He should have killed Littlefinger immediately, but he does nothing. And just a reminder, like A Clash of Kings begins with Tyrion and Cersei having a remarkably honest conversation. Uh, Admittedly, more on Cersei's side, where Cersei just openly talks about everything. She openly admits to Tyrion that she murdered Robert. She like honestly says she had nothing to do with Jon Arryn's death. All sorts of things. They discuss all the events of A Game of Thrones and try to set things straight. So really, Tyrion had every opportunity to say, we should take care of Littlefinger. In fact, in that conversation, he even says that Tywin was thinking about executing people on the small council because he didn't think they were loyal. So he already had like the tacit approval of Tywin. He should have been wanting to do it himself because of that situation. Like Tyrion almost died. He was in a sky cell. He went through that whole ordeal. He had to go to and from the Vale and nearly died. And the entire war has started because of this lie from Littlefinger. And Tyrion proceeds to do nothing. Instead, he starts quizzing Cersei about Janos Slynt and why Janos Slynt so quickly beheaded Ned and how they need to get rid of Janos Slynt, which I have like, who cares? Like Janos Slynt was taking orders. Like he wastes all of this time making sure that Janos Slynt is removed from being the head of the Gold Cloaks and stripped of Harrenhal and sent to the Wall, which for following orders, like, and I mean, I guess it's also, I think Tyrion was upset that he had ordered Allar Deem to execute the baby, Robert's baby, and he was a little upset about that. But it's like everybody else has killed so many people that there's no reason he should be wasting his time on Janos Slynt. I mean, clearly George just needed Janos Slynt to be at the Wall because he planned on having Jon behead Janos Slynt and have that clash. So he needed to get Janos Slynt to the Wall. But there's little reason for Tyrion to be wasting so much time on Janos Slynt when Littlefinger is the one that controls Janos Slynt and Littlefinger's the one that started the war, and Tyrion doesn't do anything. Like he does nothing. He even thinks like, me and Littlefinger, we need to have a discussion about that dagger. And then they never have a discussion about the dagger. He meets with him and he thinks that he thinks in his mind that Peter knows that he knows about the dagger, but they never have a conversation about it, and they never have a standoff. And later on, Littlefinger causes just even more trouble.
The funny thing is, doesn't Littlefinger act against Tyrion as if his life depended on it by trying to frame him for Joffrey's murder?
Yeah, but there's so many reasons to get rid of Tyrion and Joffrey with Joffrey's murder, but
to blame it on Tyrion specific, I mean, maybe that was just a happy accident, but at the same time, the dwarves and all that.
Yeah.
At the wedding. Here's the funny thing is,
you're absolutely right about the dwarves. Like, he wanted Tyrion to be angry. He wanted conflict between Tyrion and Joffrey.
Well, here's a quote from Tyrion 4, Clash of Kings. From Tyrion. No one had ever thought to question the appointments. Why should they? Littlefinger was no threat to anyone. A clever, smiling, genial man. Everyone's friend, always able to find whatever gold the king or his hand required, and yet such undistinguished birth, one step up from a hedge knight. He was not a man to fear. He had no banners to call, nor army of retainers, no great stronghold, no holdings to speak of, no prospects of a great marriage. But do I dare touch him? Even if he is a traitor. He was not at all certain he could, at least for now, while the war raged. So, yeah, it's kind of weird because it clearly crosses his mind to act against Littlefinger, but then it's all kind of brushed aside, which is very weird. Like, was this even a plot point in the show?
They get around it in the show by having the conversation off screen. So you're not sure how much information Catelyn has given to Tyrion. And in the show, there's one look that Tyrion gives Littlefinger when he first arrives on the small council, but that's it. There's no interaction between the characters until I think he tries to set up the marriages. Do you remember the triple scene where he goes to Pycelle and he goes to Varys and he goes to Littlefinger and he offers the 3 marriages to see who the mole is? That's like the first time they have a conversation again. So they kind of, they get away with it in the show by just not having the information out, and then, you're not in Tyrion's mind. But clearly, like, Tyrion knows it's an issue. George tries to cover it up by saying later on, like, oh, well, Littlefinger has too many people in powerful positions. It's dangerous to take out Littlefinger, which I think is the most bullshit, like, reason. Like, you took out Janos Slynt, the head of the Gold Cloaks. Like, think about how many allies Janos Slynt has.
But Janos Slynt has no money.
Right, but Janos Slynt is also, like, first of all, you're also pissing off Littlefinger because that was, Littlefinger's appointment. And Littlefinger, like, did that whole deal. But also, Janos Slynt, like, has the loyalty of all of these men that he's worked with for years.
Right, but Tyrion, coming from money himself, knows what wealth can do and how that moves things. And by the way, I did find it here. The Starks do not murder men in their beds, nor do I, Tyrion said. I tell you again, I had no part in the attempt to kill your son. The assassin was armed with your dagger. Tyrion felt the heat rise in him. It was not my dagger, he insisted. How many times must I swear to that? Lady Stark, whatever you may believe of me, I am not a stupid man. Only a fool would arm a common footpad with his own blade. Just for a moment he thought he saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. But what she said was, why would Peter lie to me? And to which Tyrion replies, why does a bear shit in the woods? He demanded. Because it's in his nature. Lying comes as easily as breathing to a man like Littlefinger. You ought to know that, you of all people.
One thing generally I think that George doesn't get right in the book very well, actually this goes for the show too, is that the King's Landing crew has been living together for years and years and years. And so it's...
King's Landing crew, you mean...
I mean, like, Stannis, not Selyse, because Selyse is on Dragonstone, but Stannis, Jon Arryn, Lysa, Sweet Robin, Renly, Tyrion, Littlefinger, Varys. They've all been living at court together for years. But during the events of A Song of Ice and Fire, you feel like Tyrion is just getting to know these characters, you know? And you're like, you've known them for years. So he makes this statement like, oh, like Littlefinger lies all the time because Tyrion has known him for years. But then when A Clash of Kings comes around, he's kind of like, oh, I just discovered all of these things about Peter Baelish, like his life and, you know, who he owns and what appointments are his. I mean, it might be that Tyrion was just so out of it and only banging whores and whatever and was not playing the Game of Thrones and wasn't thinking about it, but it's just, it just doesn't seem right. It's the same when he like goes to the Vale and is face to face with Lysa and Sweet Robin. He acts like he hasn't known these people for years and that Sweet Robin is like a child he's just run into for the first time.
Well, to be fair, is there a reason for Tyrion to be at court? Is there a reason for Tyrion to be in King's Landing all the time, surrounded by these people?
I don't know if there is. I mean, I don't know why he's not at Casterly Rock, but he is, like, he does live in King's Landing, though. I think just because he wants to hang out with his siblings.
I mean, you mean sibling. I don't think Cersei wants to hang out with him, but...
Sure. I don't know that they ever established a reason for Tyrion to be at court, but he is at court. Like, he does know these people for years. Like, he is just one of those people that's at court. You know how like Balon Swan is just at court. You know, you're like, okay, he's one of the guests of the crown that's just living there.
I mean, I'll take your argument that like he has probably, you know, a house in King's Landing if he's ever around, if he's ever in town. I'll take that, but I would argue maybe the real reason is because, you know, we're seeing King's Landing from Tyrion's eyes, and therefore we need to kind of really meet these characters again after the first book because we saw them through Ned's eyes. Now it's time to really get to know them through Tyrion's eyes. That's the real response. But you could argue that maybe Tyrion never really knew Littlefinger because he hasn't been to King's Landing in so long, and maybe since then Littlefinger has risen in power and position.
Well, they're at least always hanging out and betting on the tilts, right? Like, we know that happens. We know that Renly, and Littlefinger constantly bet on the tilts. Like, every time there's a jousting tournament or something that Robert wants to have.
Mm-hmm.
So they're at least interacting that much. I don't know. Plus, doesn't Littlefinger own a brothel? Like, doesn't Tyrion like going to brothels?
Okay. That's also fair.